Hi, my name's Josh Neese. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at the Rainbow Centre in Ashford. Today I'm going to be talking to you about challenging behaviour with children with ASD. I want to start with a health warning really, and I want you to consider how difficult it is to change behaviour. So if you have a think about the last time you tried to change your habit, whether that might be trying to go to the gym, trying to stop eating so much chocolate, taking up a new hobby, going to a new class, whatever it might be. How hard was it to change that habit, and how hard was it particularly at the start to make that change? And often people will say that it's very difficult and takes an enormous amount of energy, and that's when we have control over that behaviour directly. Now if we think about trying to change somebody else's behaviour and how much more difficult that is and the amount of energy that requires, it starts to give us a clue about how hard it is to change a child's behaviour, and particularly a child with challenging behaviour. Now consider how hard it is to change somebody's behaviour who finds change very difficult by the virtue of their own set of differences in terms of the way that they think and the way that they feel about things. One of our roles as a psychologist is to always consider the balance between change and acceptance, and we have to think carefully about what are the things that we can influence, what are the things that we can change, and what in fact do we have to accept. So during today's presentation we're going to talk a bit about understanding ASD through the National Autistic Society's SPELL framework, and challenging behaviour and the 5 Ps. So the SPELL framework includes this acronym. The S stands for structure. That means putting structure into time and trying to communicate that to the child. Positivity, that means using rewards and positive reinforcement to try and change behaviour. Empathy, trying to understand the world from a child's particular point of view. A low arousal sensory environment, which takes into account a child's specific strengths and difficulties in terms of their sensory needs and links with others in the community. Often this means links between parents and teachers. So structuring the environment helps children who have difficulties understanding the social world, who may experience high levels of anxiety when there is uncertainty and unfamiliarity. So if you think about the way that children with ASD experience the world in terms of it being very unpredictable, due to the virtue of their difficulties understanding that people have their own thoughts, feelings, desires and emotions, it's very important to think about how do we make the world more predictable, how do we take some of that uncertainty out of the world, and using things like routines can be really useful in making the world more predictable and reducing that sort of anxiety for them. So we can do that by visual timetables, and these can be flexible depending on a child's age and developmental ability. We can use symbols and pictures alongside words. It might reduce confusion, can be repeated to aid learning, and can be differentiated, of course, for children of a different age. Sometimes it seems to have an authority that adults don't, and we can think about that maybe as externalizing where the source of demands are coming from, or externalizing where that structure is. So here's an example of a morning routine. Here's another more simplistic morning routine. Here's a bedtime routine. We can also use now and next boards to make it clear what expectations of the current activity are and what's going to follow that. That can be again altered for different age groups. So the next principle is positivity, and there are whole parenting programs based on how we can praise and reward the behaviours that we want to see. So we have to consider how we can use praise and catch a child being good, and I always find that teachers, particularly in special needs school, are excellent at this. So sometimes their classes can be particularly chaotic, but they might be very good at finding the one child who's quite settled and praising and positively reinforcing the positive behaviour that they see. We can use reward charts, and in this way use tangible rewards, which tend to be more effective for children with ASD. You think about it, some children with ASD are less motivated by pleasing people and more motivated by the tangible incentives that they get, what's in it for them if they behave in a particular way. And we can coach children to develop different skills, so we can talk them through different activities, talk to them in a positive way that increases the chance of the behaviour reoccurring. So reward charts are good at changing a specific behaviour over a fixed amount of time, usually a short period of time. So you can use special interests. So if your child is really into Minecraft or unicorns, you can use that in their reward chart. So you can either make a reward chart using pictures from Google Images, or you can find some stickers that are related to Minecraft. Find a way of using that reward chart that's age appropriate. So you can use stickers on a sheet, or you can use marbles in a jar, pebbles in a pot, those kinds of things. For older children, it might be more monetary values, but it's important to use inexpensive reinforcers that can be immediate rather than large gifts which might be unattainable, or it's very difficult to do over a long period of time. There should always be a specific behaviour which you are targeting. So if that's, for example, around toileting or brushing teeth, you should stick to one of those. Often parents will use a single reward chart for a range of different behaviours, and that can be problematic and basically less effective for all sorts of different reasons. So it's better to stick to one target behaviour. Some clear don'ts: so never remove rewards after they've been achieved, and don't reward different behaviours in the same way. So here's an example of a reward chart that's focused around toileting, and the child who this was made for had a special interest in Eddie Stobart, and he told me about all the different types of lorry on the picture. A reward chart might include things that were going to happen anyway. So we've got a bedtime routine here with toileting, washing hands and brushing teeth, and then the reward at the end is story time, which is probably a good part of a bedtime routine anyway. So our next principle is empathy. So trying to look at the world from your child's perspective. So the first thing to consider with autism spectrum being a social communication difficulty is, does the social world make sense to your child? Can they understand the social rules and conventions that mean they can't complete different behaviours? In a particular situation, for example, a shopping centre, birthday party, are they overstimulated, or are they very anxious. So we can use social stories to help to make the implicit social information explicit. So social stories describe an understanding that the child seems to be missing and say what can be said or done in that individual situation. So they work well with children once they understand simple sentences. They should be written by a parent or professional who knows that child well. It addresses a difficult situation that is already being experienced or for which a child needs to prepare for. A social story has to be positive. It's not a list of things that a child shouldn't do. Nobody wants to hear a story about that. It describes the situation using the right level of visual support for the child, which is accurate and is from their perspective. So the main principles of social stories are that they come from that child's particular perspective, that they are positive, and that they focus on a particular situation. And you can spend a great deal of time and really go to town with it and think about the different proportion of sentences that you use in a particular social story. So somebody called Carol Gray has written lots of books about social stories, and she talks about these different types of sentences and suggests that they're used in these particular proportions. So you have your descriptive sentences, and there should be about 2 to 5 of these in each story. You have your perspective sentences, and again there should be about 2 to 5 of these in each story. Your affirmative sentences, between 2 and 5 again of those, and your directive sentences, and there should only be about 1 or 2 of each of these in your story. So the idea is that you're describing, you're giving accurate and objective information, you're telling them where they'll go, what they'll do, what other people will be doing, what they'll see, what they will think and feel in those particular situations. So, for example, Christmas Day is the 25th December. Most children go to school. Sometimes I get sick. They're all descriptive sentences. Perspective sentences, so what others might think, believe or feel. My mum and dad know when it's time for me to go to bed. Teachers like it when students raise their hand to ask a question in the classroom. Some children believe in Santa Claus. Affirmative sentences, so these enhance the meaning of the previous sentence. They can be used to emphasize the importance of the message or provide reassurance to that person. And directive sentences, so these are the ones where we are telling the child clearly what to do. So they're gentle, they offer a response or range of responses to a particular situation. There's a positive focus, you allow some flexibility, you focus on that they will try to do something in a particular behaviour. So for example, I will try to cover my mouth when I cough. When I am angry, I can take 3 deep breaths or go for a walk. So here's an example of a social story, and I would say with social stories that calling them stories is a bit of false advertising, because they're simply just a description of what a situation entails and what a person can do, so very limited on plot and character development. So here's one about unexpected noises. There are many noises. Sometimes noises surprise me. They are unexpected. Some unexpected noises are telephones, doorbells, barking dogs, breaking glass, vacuum cleaners, slamming doors, honking horns, and thunder. These sounds are okay. So that's our affirmative sentence. I will try to stay calm when I hear unexpected noises. That's directive. Adults can tell me when the noise will stop. That's prescriptive. So this is the incredible 5-point scale, and it's again a way of using a visual aid to help communicate with a particular child, particularly around emotions and behaviour. Can be very effective. So what I tend to do is to sit down with a child, with a parent, and we talk through particular problem we're looking at. So for example, if that's anger, we might talk about what 1 looks like and use a child's own language for that. So that might be relaxed or chilled, and we might have 2, which might be I'm not sure or feeling a bit funny. 3 might be frustrated, 4 might be angry, and 5 might be very angry indeed. So here's one from the 5-point scale website. So again, calm and relaxed, feeling okay, I'm a little nervous, I'm getting angry, I'm going to explode. We can use the 5-point scale along with the rumblings, rage and recovery model. So we can think about a situation where a child's behaviour is beginning to escalate, where things are becoming more difficult and that child is feeling more stressed, and parents tend to be very able to read those subtle cues, and nobody knows their child better than the parent. So we can think about how we can change the environment, distract that child, acknowledge or comment on the difficulties and praise the coping skills, and offer things like physical contact, hugs, reassurance, holding hands, etc. Once a situation has escalated past a point, it's very difficult to use those same strategies. And when a child enters that rage phase, all of the attempts that we make to de-escalate a situation are merely fanning the flames and making things much more difficult. So at that point we need to focus on safety, we need to think about avoiding escalating that situation further, stick to doing rather than talking, and we might need to remove the audience. So that might be a sibling, for example, who might be vulnerable to a physical attack. And we also need to think about how we avoid physical contact or any physical confrontation in that situation. After that stage has passed, there then is the opportunity for recovery. So we need to think about how we allow time for that recovery. We need to avoid escalating that behaviour again, and we need to make space for reconciliation of some kind, and think about what's necessary in terms of reinforcing our own values and principles, but also how that's going to help things to remain calm and to continue de-escalating that situation. So we can use the rumblings, rage and recovery model with the 5-point scale as is shown in this diagram. So you can think about behaviour escalating through 1 and 2, might be rumblings, but at 3, 4 and 5 we're in the rage phase, where we need to step back and de-escalate, and then when things return to 2 or 1 we might be in that phase of recovery. And this can be really helpful for parents, particularly when communicating with one another, because you can say to the other parent, I think we're at a 3 or I think we're at a 4, and we need to change tacks, we need to back off a bit, maybe we need to stop talking or trying to distract, and we need to focus on keeping that child safe and keeping ourselves safe and other family members safe. And also again, when we're moving into that recovery phase, when are those opportunities to reconcile? Do we still think we're at a 3 and we need to give it a bit more time, or do you think now is a good time to go and talk to that child and to reconcile things? So now we're moving on to the low arousal sensory principle of the spell framework, and we can think about all the different types of sensory input which are coming into that child's brain, and you can think about that a bit like a graphic equalizer. If you had an old hi-fi, if you open that on your computer, and for most of us, what we think as a visually, say, busy environment is similar. So what I would regard as a visually busy environment would be similar to what you regard as a visually busy environment, what we interpret as a comfortable amount of sensory feedback from our sense of touch, where we feel comfortable with the clothes that we're wearing, and the amount of feedback we're getting in that sense from our environment. What we consider to be a loud noise is likely to be similar. The taste, the strong taste that we experience is likely to be similar. Smells, pain, and where we are in space is likely to be similar. Also, there's going to be variation between each person, so no one person is going to have the same sensory profile as another person. Children with ASD tend to have quite a clear sensory profile, and again, so obviously some variation, but what we tend to see is a sensitivity to visual busyness, a sensitivity to touch. That might be in terms of finding things like labels and clothes very difficult to tolerate. Might be a difficulty tolerating loud noises. They might prefer bland foods and have quite a restricted diet. They might be very sensitive to particular smells. They might have a very high pain threshold, and I've heard lots of stories of children with ASD who say break their arm and only report it weeks later, and then they go have an X-ray, and everybody's amazed that they've been able to withstand that amount of pain for so long. And obviously children trying to find themselves in space, so moving backwards and forwards, say, to stimulate themselves, and fidgeting, often to give themselves a level of sensory input that actually helps them to concentrate. So it might be distracting for everybody else in the classroom, but that might help that child to concentrate in that, say, maths lesson. So what do we need to consider when we are trying to create a low arousal sensory environment? So we need to think about that child's specific sensory needs. We need to consider that can be very distressing when a child is overstimulated. We can think about the environments that we live in and try to create living spaces which are quiet, not cluttered. We can think about giving children opportunities to have breaks from busy environments like classrooms and playgrounds, and we can consider having some low arousal time at home, having a sensory area or room. So some parents are very fortunate to have lots of space at home, might create a sensory room, or might have a garage that they use as a sensory area. For others, it might be having a tent with some sensory toys in it. And finally, moving on to our last principle of the spell framework, links. So how can we encourage parents and teachers to communicate with one another and give that particular information which is vital to helping that particular morning. So for example, if a child's had a very bad night's sleep, that can be really useful information for that teacher. If a child has had an argument with another student at school, that information can be really helpful to parents. So you can use these communication books. You can encourage your NHS supporters, helpers, to copy letters into to schools. You can join a local organisation for children with ASD. You can talk to organisations like iAsk, who can help you with education also. So it's about trying to build links between parents and different organisations in a way that helps that child. And it's that old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. So we can consider all of these different foundations in establishing an ASD specific approach. So that might be changing the layout of rooms, clearing floor space, thinking about how we store materials, plan furniture, all of these sensory issues we've talked about, different communication styles, visual materials, visual aids, thinking about the child as an active participant in communication, being attuned to their needs. We might think about developing an ASD specific approach, so activities being functional, concrete and meaningful, activities being motivating within themselves and for that particular child. A focus on developing communication skills, increasing independence, thinking again about sensory needs, building in breaks, adopting to a child's particular learning style. There are some particular ASD specific strategies, things like PECs that you might have heard of, intensive interaction, and again tailoring those to an individual's learning style. And again, individualising all of those approaches based on the child's strengths and difficulties, what's worked in the past and what hasn't worked in the past. So you can think about each of these different principles of the spell framework: structure, positivity, empathy, low arousal, and links with the community, and think about how do you further put these in place, how do you develop your ASD specific approach based on these principles. So that's the first part of this presentation completed, and now we're going to talk a bit more about challenging behaviour. So challenging behaviour is an area which is very well researched and addressed in the psychological literature, and there are a number of different approaches to it. But what exactly do we mean by challenging behaviour? And there's a debate about whether we should call it challenging behaviour or behaviour that challenges, whether we can think about behaviour as being an individual's responsibility or failing in the team around that person to successfully adapt the environment in a way that means that behaviour is unnecessary. So we define behaviour that challenges if it causes harm to other people, if it stops them fulfilling an important aspect of their lives. So it might be dangerous, so it might be a child who bites another child when he's angry, destructive, might be bending or breaking his dad's computer discs, it might be disruptive, it might be a child who argues loudly when she's told no, might be disgusting, might be wiping bogies on things, it might be developmentally inappropriate to stay in close proximity of his mother at all times. And they're all talked about in this book about parenting with a positive behaviour support framework. It's also worth again considering, are we able to control someone else's behaviour? Is that something that we should aspire to do? And it's interesting to consider the conversations around parenting that occur in the media. What are your particular values and what is important to you when considering your child's behaviour? How can you regulate your own emotional responses to a particular situation? And in the context of, as a parent, this isn't happening at your place of work, this is happening at home, where you might have the expectation that you can relax and recover from other tasks such as work. How can you respond assertively in a particular situation, and how can you make sure you're a step ahead next time? And there's two different patterns of escalation that we see when there's challenging behaviour. So we have symmetrical escalation of behaviour, where a child said one thing and then a parent reacts by escalating that situation, the child says another thing, and the parent escalates it further, and the child escalates it, and so on and so forth. And that's basically how wars start. And you can see the same patterns between, say, North and South Korea. And we have some other patterns where we have one particular party in a conflict who continue to escalate a situation and continue to try and make things more and more difficult and exert their power and influence on somebody else. And sometimes what can happen is that this pattern repeats itself until the other party responds in a way and escalates it to such a degree that's quite a surprise to the other party. So we need to consider how we can remain assertive in those situations. How can we respond in a way which maintains our authority, and where we don't feel like we are simply being passive to a child's demands, where we feel that there is at least a level playing field there. And also, how do we regulate our own emotional responses? So can we pause for a moment before we respond? Do we need to abandon our own agenda at a particular time? So it's often when there's a time of stress, for example, we're loading up the car to go away on holiday, we've lifted 5 heavy bags into our car, and we've realised that we're not going to fit everything in our car, and we're focused on that, and then the child's behaviour starts to escalate, perhaps because of the change that's coming, or perhaps because they're seeing other people get stressed. And how do we move from being focused on our own task to being focused on their behaviour and de-escalating a difficult situation? How can we try not to take a child's behaviour personally, particularly if they know how to push our buttons? How can we notice our own physical responses, our heart rate, our breathing, our muscles tensing, etc.? How can we notice our own emotions of anger, frustration, sadness, embarrassment, shame, etc.? And how can we consider the tone of our voice and our body language to try and make sure that we are being assertive in that situation and not unnecessarily escalating it? So first of all, we need to think about profiling a child's strengths and difficulties. So what do they like? What are they interested in? What motivates them? What are their special interests? How do we use them to help us in difficult situations? Is that about using them, say, in a reward chart? Is that using them as a distraction? Is that in all sorts of different ways to try and help them? Is that about using them in, say, a social story? When do they learn best? How do they learn best? Is that visual information? Is that concrete information in a very clear and concise way? What are their difficulties and weaknesses? What do they struggle with? How do they communicate best? What do they struggle to understand? When are they under or overstimulated? What makes them frightened or scared? When do they feel relaxed? So then we can consider, how do we analyse a problem? How do we understand a particular behaviour? So we can think about all human behaviour as having a function, a reason, or a purpose. So an obvious example is that we all go to work for lots of different reasons, but one of them is so that we earn money. So that's the function of that behaviour. It's important to try and understand why the child is behaving in a certain way so that we can change the behaviour effectively. We need to ask what happens before and after the behaviour. What are they gaining or avoiding? Does the child achieve the outcome that they want after exhibiting that particular challenging behaviour? So how do we do this? Well, one of the most simple ways of doing that is through what we call an ABC chart. I think on the early bird course they call them a star chart. So the ABCs are the antecedents, the behaviour and the consequences. The star charts are the the setting, the trigger, the actions and the results. So what we've got here is particular setting events for a behaviour outburst. We've got a lack of sleep, a busy day at school. We've got an argument with this child's sister over the TV channel, and the behaviour that occurs is that the sister is hit by the child. The consequences are that the child gets to watch what he wants on the TV, and that's a positive reinforcement, so they are getting something out of that situation, and the learning there potentially is hitting sister means I get to watch what I want on the TV. We've got another example here, which is again we're seeing the setting events as failed a maths test at school, and the child's been on their own in the playground at school. They have homework this evening that perhaps they're stressed about or worried about, and the trigger is being asked what dessert he wants from the shop. He starts crying and shouting, lashing out at mum, trying to hit her. The consequences are that they leave the shop and avoid making a choice. The negative reinforcement is avoiding a choice, and the learning is I avoid difficult choices or uncertainty by lashing out. Another example here, setting event, a lack of sleep the night before, an argument with a sibling in the car. The trigger is another child is playing on the play equipment and blocking the way. The behaviour that's exhibited is pushing the child off the climbing frame. The consequences, playing on the climbing frame without that other child or that being blocked. And the positive reinforcement is I get to use the play equipment if I push other children from it. So again, we can think about all human behaviour fitting into one of these categories. So it might be getting somebody else's attention or interacting with somebody else. So human beings are social creatures by nature, and we might want somebody else's attention. Children with autism might have difficulty doing that in an appropriate way, so they might develop behaviours which mean that they interact with people, but those interactions or that behaviour is inappropriate, leading to that interaction. It might be shouting at dad to come and play with Lego. It might be trying to avoid something, so it might be refusing to go to school because Teresa is there. It might be trying to get something tangible or an activity, so having a tantrum because somebody wants to play on the trampoline at 11 o'clock at night. It might be shouting and screaming, refusing to go to school because it's sports day and they don't like sports day, or they don't like the change in the routine. It might be a sensory need, so it might be trying to get a sensory experience, like spending an hour in the shower because they like the feel of that on their skin. It might be trying to avoid a sensory sensation by refusing to go into the town centre because of the noise. So now we can think about how do we solve that problem. So we might need to think about how do we understand the relationship between the trigger, the behaviour and the consequences. What's the purpose of that behaviour? We need to make a hypothesis about that. We need to make a good guess about why that particular behaviour is happening, and then we can base our intervention based on that hypothesis. So, can we avoid a situation? Can we not take Harry to the supermarket if he finds that experience very distressing? Can we try and make that difficult situation a bit better? So can we give Harry ear defenders at the supermarket if the noise is overwhelming to him? Can we add cues that prompt appropriate behaviours? So before going to the supermarket, can we say to Harry, what do you do if you start getting stressed out of the supermarket? We could have our little 5-point scale there so that he could say where he is on that scale. We could encourage an equivalent behaviour. So we could say, Harry, when you're feeling stressed in the supermarket, tell me and we'll go and pay and leave the shop. And we respond with particular consequences. So Harry, if we finish the shopping, we'll go to the park afterwards. So we can also help to show the different types of behaviour, different behaviours being appropriate or inappropriate using this traffic light system. So the thing I like about this approach is that we're labelling the behaviour rather than the child. So some different approaches might, for example, use the storm, rain, cloud, sunshine, and then you might put that child's name on a particular weather pattern. But the difficulty with that is you're labelling the child as being good or bad, and I think it's much more helpful, particularly in the long term. We don't want children to suffer with low self-esteem because they're always the child that's on the storm cloud. What we want them to know is that there's some behaviours that are appropriate and some behaviours that are inappropriate. It's not that they are naughty or bad, it's that their behaviours are not appropriate in that particular context. So we've got our red behaviours: kicking, hitting, biting. There are other examples. For example, spitting might be one that you add to it. Amber behaviours: shouting, screaming, stamping feet. And then all of the green behaviours. So you can see this box is slightly bigger, and you want to think about all of the different green behaviours. So again, what I tend to do is to do this with a child, or ask a parent to do this with a child, and it's their list, so it's personal to them. They're taking some responsibility of it, and you can call this the house rules. And again, there's an equality about this because other siblings, parents even, the same rules will apply. Their behaviours, if they exhibit these behaviours, will still be inappropriate. Yeah, so there's a sort of equality in labelling those different behaviours in this way. We can think about our responses to those green, amber and red behaviours. So we're trying to, again, prevent things escalating to the amber behaviours. We're trying to anticipate things escalating when we're in the amber area, and we need to act clearly during the red behaviours and give a clear signal that that behaviour needs to stop. So we can reward appropriate behaviours. We can divert, preempt or promote a functionally equivalent behaviour. When it's an amber behaviour, we might take a break, distract the child at that stage. And when there's a red behaviour, we might give a clear sign of disapproval, so it might simply be stop. We might also consider a bridging activity, again, to help to de-escalate that situation. So it might be that if a child's been escalating behaviour in the living room and things are getting more and more difficult, we might say, okay, you've had some time out, now let's do some colouring in so that we can continue to de-escalate that situation. So natural consequences are a way of thinking about how people learn and how we can let people learn through their own experience. So throughout our lifetimes, we are always learning from our mistakes, and we are changing our behaviour in relation to the consequences of our actions. So as parents, we want children to engage in this process, and we want to interfere as little as possible so that children can learn from their experience. So for example, if you do not put your football kit on and you're not ready and waiting when the coach comes, you will not be able to go and play football. If you eat all the biscuits today, you won't have any for tomorrow. If you don't come to dinner, your food will be cold. If you jump in puddles, you'll have wet shoes. So they're all examples of learning through natural consequences. So some ideas here of things not to do. Don't take them away. Go and stop the bus and ask them to wait. Buy more biscuits, etc. Do let them miss the football if they're not ready. Don't buy them more biscuits if they've eaten them all. Don't threaten what you'll do and not follow that through. We can use logical consequences when we need to intervene in a situation where that situation requires an intervention by a parent or an adult. So, if you don't tidy your toys, they will go away until tomorrow. If you eat all the biscuits, I won't buy any next time. If you play on Minecraft for extra time today, you will lose that time tomorrow. If you go on the internet at night, I will change the Wi-Fi code before I go to bed. So don't tidy the toys yourself, give them back later that day, keep them for 3 days, buy more biscuits, change their shoes, let them play Minecraft. Tomorrow, do put the toys in the box and put them out of sight till tomorrow. And the consequences should be immediate, give them choices ahead of time, they should be fair. And actually giving children limited choices is again a really good strategy for avoiding de-escalation and giving a child an opportunity in a situation. So you might say you can stop shouting, or you can keep shouting, then go on the timeout. So as parents, we are constantly trying to teach our children different skills to deal with different situations, and this is based on when they are developmentally ready and can deal with those particular situations. So you can use one example, which might be a child finding unexpected changes difficult, and you can have a conversation when they're calm and ready and talk to them about, do things go just as planned all of the time? Are there sometimes changes in your typical routine? And then we ask them, what do we do in those situations? We stay calm. We try and remember that not everything has changed, and we ask ourselves, what has changed and what has stayed the same? And we can ask, what can I control in that situation? And you can role play different situations. And then when you're in a difficult situation, you might have to prompt them and say, today we are going to school. If there's traffic on the way on the A28, we may have to take a different route. There might be a sudden unexpected change. And then we can remind our child, what do? We try and stay calm. We remember that not everything has changed. And we ask, what has changed and what has stayed the same? What can I control? And again, you can role play. That lots of times to help your child to develop that skill. And these are all skills and exercises that have been developed by a psychologist called Jed Baker. And you can search on YouTube for No More Meltdowns by Jed Baker, and you can watch a series of videos about teaching these skills, which I think are very helpful, particularly for sort of upper primary school children. The thing I like about the videos is he uses students from the school where he works, and they're quite entertaining videos, and really brings it to life. There are lots of children with autism spectrum who have demand avoidant behaviours, who become very stressed or anxious when any demands are placed on them. So what can we do in those situations? We can use indirect commands. We can try challenges. So I bet I can get my coat on before you. Or can you show me how to do my shoelaces? You can try to make them feel useful. It would be really helpful if you could just pretend you don't know, get it wrong. For example, misread words in books, or ask them to show you how to do a certain task that you want them to do. You can offer them limited choices to give them some control. So do you want to start your homework at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock? You can use the when-then philosophy. So when you do your homework, then you can play on Minecraft. And you can use a remote or external authority figure. So, well, the Queen says all children have to go to school. So we can think about all of these different strategies and how we can plan different interventions. So this can be a really helpful process to go through in terms of helping a child to understand a difficult situation, and also to think about what's useful to do in that situation. So we've got difficult situation is being stopped at a red light, being stuck in traffic, taking an unfamiliar route, misunderstanding where we are going and not knowing where that is. What can you do to avoid this situation? Make sure I know where I'm going, give me a picture, a symbol or card, slowly talk me through the journey, warn me of an unfamiliar route, provide a running commentary of the journey, distract me with my favourite music. Behaviours I may display when I'm getting distressed: tense mouth, face looks tense, trying to ignore you, starting to rock back and forth. If this escalates further, it might be rocking back and forth more violently, trying to get out of my seat, banging my head against the window, pulling the driver's hair, screaming and shouting, throwing anything that's within reach. And what can you do if I'm displaying this behaviour? When I'm showing early warning signs, remind me where we're going, make sure I have hold of my picture card, play my favourite music, tell me about fun things we're doing when we reach our destination. If this is further escalated, talk in a calm voice, don't use too many words, tell me where we're going, say sit on your hands. If I'm banging my head, find something soft, do not continue the journey, and try and talk to them calmly after things have de-escalated. So this is an example of a behavioural passport, and this has been based on a special interest, which was Mario and Sonic. So my name is Joe Bloggs, I'm 12 and I go to Hogwarts School. I have autism spectrum. This means I have problems communicating and interacting with others. I often struggle to talk to people, particularly new people. So this child's strengths are: I like drawing, I like spending time with my friends, I like programming my computer, I love Mario and Sonic. These are some of the things I find difficult: going to unfamiliar places, my routine being disrupted, people lightly touching me, loud noises, crowded places. Things that help me: taking a step back and giving me some time and space, wearing ear defenders. If I need to make a decision, offering me a limited choice, not asking open-ended questions, explaining my daily and weekly routine to me. This is what you can do when I'm finding it difficult. Give me a chance to take a break if I look upset or worried. Ask me yes or no questions, talking about my special interest, distract me by changing the subject or making a joke. So we also have here a flowchart for parents to think about the different interventions they can use. So those kind of green behaviours, we need to be on top of praising, rewarding, and developing new skills. When things escalate to that amber level, we need to be thinking about ignoring behaviours that we can, offering warnings to those amber behaviours, preempting different behaviours, changing activities or shortening activities, diverting, distracting, giving an equivalent task, taking a break. Red behaviours, so we need an immediate response. We need to say stop, finish. We need to take an immediate action or strategy. For a younger child, that might be time out. And then we might need to think about how to give them a calming signal, and how do we help to have that bridging activity, help things again to de-escalate. So it's important to emphasise that we need a disability focus. And we need to think about when you're in a difficult situation, you know, what often parents will tell me is that it's other people's responses that make that situation more difficult. So if a child is having a meltdown in the supermarket, a parent can feel like everybody is watching them or judging them, and that can lead to really difficult feelings. It may be that parent responding in a way which is unhelpful to that situation. There are some people who can be prejudiced, who can be unhelpful or can make particular judgments about parents or children, and that can be very, very difficult. There's also lots of people out there who understand these difficulties, who remember being parents themselves, who might have children with difficulties, and it's important to see that situation for what it really is. And if we can control our own emotional responses to that, if we can stay calm and level-headed and remain assertive, then most people are going to understand that that's a difficult situation which you're struggling with. And I think there's something specific about sort of British culture and the things that we find different or difficult here. You know, in America, say, they might be more supportive and more vocal in supporting parents with children with difficulties, whereas the kind of stiff upper lip here can be unhelpful in that regard. It's important to try and see that situation through your child's perspective. It's important to think about how children with ASD struggle with behaviour, as another might struggle with, say, reading. Think about your expectations on your child with ASD, and maybe your the comparisons that you make with your child and others of the same age. Try not to make judgments about their behaviour. Try not to get caught up in a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, or giving your child lots of negative messages that they might internalise. If your child has a learning problem as well, it might be important to think about them in terms of their developmental age rather than their chronological age. Think about how you look after yourself. It's important that you are a resource to your child, that you need to be able to stay calm and relaxed, and what do you need yourself to be able to sustain this really stressful and difficult situation over the longer term. How can you be realistic about what you can tackle? What behaviours can you prioritise? Can you give enough time for your different interventions to work? How can you view your mistakes as opportunities to learn? We all need to be kind to ourselves, give time to ourselves, and balance our needs as parents with our individual needs as people. It takes a village to raise a child. How do we build a support network? How do we let other people that we trust help to support our child and to support us as parents? How can we ask for help? How do we work together with others? And how do we develop our own toolbox of strategies to deal with the stress of having a child with autism? Can we consider challenging our own thoughts and perceptions of stressful events? How do we be kind to and compassionate to ourselves? And how can we consider other tools, for example, exercise, mindfulness, relaxation exercises, activities which give you a break. Some parents are able to access counselling or cognitive behaviour therapy to help them through really stressful and difficult situations. Here are a list of links to different resources. I would always encourage people to look at the National Autistic Society website, which is both comprehensive and very sensible information. There's the Kent Autistic Trust, the Challenging Behaviour Foundation. You can get free visual aids and resources at Twinkle. There's the 5-point scale website there. There's some books such as The Incredible Years, Positive Behaviour Support for Parents there, the Practical Behaviour Management Solutions, that's the 5 Ps, and No More Meltdowns by Jed Baker. And also Jed Baker has a number of videos on YouTube which are free to watch. Thank you very much for listening to this talk. Bye.